friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video I'm going to be doing the To Reread or Not To Reread book tag. And this was originally created by Robert G., reader of books, and I was tagged to do this by Kevin Toll, so I will definitely have both of their videos linked down below in the description for you to check out as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into these questions about rereading. So question one is, do you reread fiction? Why or why not? And I would say for me, it really depends. Some I do, some I don't. If it's a long fantasy series or like earlier entries in a series where something new is coming out, I am probably more prone to reread just to refresh myself on all the nitty-gritty details of something. But if it's a standalone, I'm definitely less prone to rereading unless it's an all-time favorite. And especially if it's a thriller, the chances of me rereading are fairly low because I feel like the main enjoyment of those for me is generally the plot twists and the reveals. And once I know those, the experience of reading just won't kind of be the same. And I tend to remember the broad strokes of a plot for quite a while. And there's just always a ton of new ones I'm eager to check out instead. So I tend not to reread those. Question two is, do you reread nonfiction? Why or why not? And I'll say for me, generally, I won't. It's not something I read a lot of to start with. If I'm picking up nonfiction, it's typically going to be a memoir of somebody who's gone through a crazy experience or who just has something interesting to say. And I feel like for me, the most enjoyable aspects to those are like the shocking moments of someone's story or the unexpected moments of someone's story and sort of how they as a person feel about those things and deal with those. I like exploring different personality types and how they cope with something and why someone is the way that they are. And kind of once I know the broad strokes of that from the first read through, it's very rare I would consider coming back to something to reread it. Question three is, if you reread fiction, what kind of fiction are you most likely to choose? Bestsellers, classic lit, genre fiction? And what is your reason for the choice or choices that you've made? For me, I already sort of touched on this in my answer to question one, but I'm most prone to reread genre fiction for sure because A, that's a lot of what I read, and B, that's typically where you tend to find series where I want to remember a piece of the story before moving on to the next chunk of it. I'm not really a classic girly. I tend to have a lot of issues with the prose, and I also tend to find that classic authors tend to spend more time describing things. And as somebody who doesn't visualize while I read, that is a real downer for me because I will be zoning out every time. Question four is, if you reread nonfiction, what type of nonfiction are you most likely to choose? So like histories, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs, philosophy, science, theology, travelogues, etc. And what is the reason for the choices that you've made? So for me, I tend not to reread nonfiction, but I feel like if I ever do, it'll be a situation where I really enjoyed someone's memoir of a crazy experience, and then either have a situation of somebody I know kind of experiencing something akin or adjacent to that experience, where I may want to kind of like revisit this person's experience to kind of gain some ideas or some perspective on what the person I know might be going through. Or I might reference something that I thought was really interesting in more of an informational kind of book that I read years ago. Question five is, if you've read a book which has been translated from another language, would you reread the same book in a newer or different translation? And for me, I feel like the answer to this is most likely going to be no. But there are maybe some scenarios where I could see something like this happening. So one example of this could be like if I've read an English translation of a book that was originally written in French, I could potentially see myself visiting the French version of that if I felt like the translation was done poorly. I do speak French fluently enough to be able to do that if the language is not overly advanced and if I'm like physically reading and not listening on audio. And I could also see myself picking up like a more modern translation of maybe a classic because I tend to really not enjoy classic prose. So if I have a desire to read a classic and there's a more modern translation available and the reviews for it are fine, I'm more prone to pick that up. Question six is, how many times would you reread the same book? The maximum times I've read any book so far has been 3. And that was kind of a case of I read the first book in a series, I reread it later, anticipating moving on to the sequels, then something came up, I didn't have time, So then when I was finally ready to actually continue the series, I reread again. But I could also see situations where I end up increasing that number a lot more for all-time favorite series. So things like Red Rising, like I could see myself rereading this like every 5 years for the foreseeable future and end up reading this thing like 11, 12 times and loving it every single time. So you just never know. It depends how much I love a thing. It depends how detailed it is and how much I want to catch on to. It depends how many times I want to experience the same story. Lots of factors, but at this point, the most amount I've ever read any book is 3 times. Question 7 is, what's the most recent book you've reread? And for me, I'm in the middle of a reread right now, actually, The High King's Tomb by Kristen Britton, which is the 3rd book in the Green Rider series. And the reason for this is that I'm finally continuing on with the series. So I've previously read the first 3, but want to catch up on the series for the release of number 8 coming this fall. And so I'm rereading the first 3. And the final question is to tag some friends. And I kind of struggled with who to tag on this one because a lot of my friends don't read nonfiction. But 2 that I came up with that do sometimes read some nonfiction are my husband Jake, the bookish drummer, and Ian over at Ian the Reader. So y'all are both tagged. And I will say anyone else watching this who wants to do it, feel free. You're tagged. So that was it for all of the questions today. I'm most curious to hear from all of you down below in the comments. What is your favorite book or series to reread, or what is the book you have reread the most? Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye.